When we build villains, there's something that's easy to overlook, but is probably the most important part of the villain's journey, and that's its origins. The first thing we think about when we're building a villain is what they're going to be like at the table, how they're going to be when they're fighting. How are you going to be able to mess with your players with this new interesting antagonist that you've created? And I feel like when I look at villains in this way, I tend to get more of a surface level threat than anything with deep meaning. I might as well just pick a monster out of the monster manual or use something pre-made. The way I think about villains is like puzzle pieces. The only reason a puzzle piece fits is because of its shape, its edges, the gaps, the bits that got cut away. That shape is the backstory. The origin isn't a fun little bio paragraph that you write because you feel like you should. It is the load-bearing wall of your entire campaign. Knock it out and the whole story collapses. This is something that I've learned through trial and error, and at least one of my campaigns ending in a TPK that was honestly kind of my fault. Your story is only as good as your villain, because a genuinely good antagonist is the thing that makes your heroes grow. So are you sure your villain's ready? Let's find out. Let's talk about the evolution of evil, D&D style, because it's actually a pretty fun little history lesson. Back in the early days of the hobby, villains were basically weather systems. Dragons, they're evil. The book says so. Beasts roared and ate adventurers because that's what beasts do, right? There was no inner life, no tragic flashback or sad little diary entry. They were instinctual forces of chaos, nature's way of saying roll initiative. And obviously that worked for a while because the genre itself was younger and the table just wanted a monster to hit. But somewhere along the way, and I'd argue it happened gradually, like a slow rolling boulder trap, players get hungrier. They want villains that will argue with them, who doubt themselves at 3 AM in their evil tower and grieve something, even if that something is their family that never loved them, or the friend who got left behind. This is the era of the sympathetic antagonist, and honestly it's the era we live in now. Players have been raised on stories where the bad guy gets a flashback episode. They expect it. If you don't give that to them, they'll just write the flashback episode themselves, usually out loud at the table. Your villains tend to work best when they're a shadow of your heroes. Not a literal twin, but like a psychological one. The villain should embody the qualities your players are quietly trying not to look at in themselves. Greed they're ashamed of, or anger they keep capped. The fear of becoming irrelevant or unloved or forgotten. Because every villain is the hero of their own story. They're not evil for evil's sake. They're responding to pressure. Could be environmental pressure, personal pressure, the universe leaning on them in a very specific spot until something cracks. Your job isn't to make them evil, it's to make them make sense. But Flamey, how do I build one of these things? You need to build a foundational trauma. You can start in childhood. Was the big bad evil guy neglected as a child? Maybe they were spoiled rotten, perhaps systematically misunderstood by everyone around them. Pick one of them, or all three. Take Voldemort for example. The man's entire orphanage-raised, loveless upbringing is basically the operating manual for why he grew up incapable of trust or affection. I'm not saying copy that exactly, but you need something in that slot, you know? A childhood wound that's a seed and everything else just waters it. And then you add fractured relationships, some sort of betrayal, a mentor who turned their back, or a friend who chose someone else, or maybe they had a sibling who got the inheritance instead of them, along with the title and their parents' love. Silco from Arcane is a great example here. He's not just some guy who runs a drug trade. He's a man shaped by the betrayal of someone he considered family, and that betrayal is the hinge the whole character swings on. Without it, he's just a crime boss. And then you add a pivotal turning point. This is the big moment, the catastrophic failure, the loss so deep it rearranges the furniture of who they are. Magneto is the textbook case. His entire worldview is basically a generational warning flare lit by the Holocaust. His extremism isn't born from hatred for hatred's sake. It's a desperate, almost parental urge to make sure his people are never that vulnerable ever again. You can disagree with his methods, you're supposed to, but you understand the fear that's underneath them, and that's the goal. Sprinkle on some curdling of intentions. This bit's important, so make sure you don't skip it. It's the slow descent, not a single dramatic moment, but the years of small, reasonable seeming compromises that add up to a monster. A great example of this is Arthas Zenithil. He didn't just wake up one day and decided to become the Lich King. He started as a guy trying to save his people from a plague, a great goal to have, and made one morally grey decision after another, each one justified by the last, until he was holding a cursed sword, and then it was too late. You need to show your players that curdling, not just the end result of what happens, but the difference between the milk was bad and watching it go off in real time, but maybe a little bit quicker. Here's a trick that you could use that I constantly use now. A villain's greatest weakness is usually just their greatest strength. For instance, boundless kindness becomes a vulnerability to manipulation or heartbreak or people who smell an easy mark. Something like intense devotion curdles into obsession that boils down everything it touches, including the thing that it was devoted to. Look at Zephyroth. The guy started out as a celebrated war hero. He was calm and composed and pretty powerful and respected. It's only when he learns the truth about his own artificial engineered origins that something in him snaps clean in half. His downfall was the exact moment his sense of self gets pulled out from under him. Or Griffith, pure, undiluted ambition. That ambition is what makes him magnetic in the first place. It's the spark of the whole story. But unchecked, the same ambition is exactly what leads him to sacrifice the people closest to him for power. The strength and the flaw are the same trait, which I find almost elegant. Next time you're building your big bad boy, ask yourself, what's their best quality? Now what does that quality look like if nobody ever tells them that's enough? But Flamey, how does this all become useful at the table? You might have heard of something called knife theory. Ask your players for knives, their loose threads, an unresolved relationship, or maybe they have a missing parent or something, or there's a rival that you never got closure with. These are gifts. These are little weapons they've handed to you. Handle first, of course, saying, please, stab me with this later, but tastefully. Then you integrate them in 2 stages. Stage 1 is low impact, like quietly. An old acquaintance shows up in a tavern and just waves. The party passes through a town holding a memorial for a tragedy that happens to connect, very faintly, to someone's backstory. Nothing dramatic, just a pebble in the shoe, you know? A little, that was weird moment. And then you hit them with the stage 2 gut punch. This is the reveal that the big bad boy is the player's long lost sibling, or their beloved mentor who taught the paladin everything they know and is now standing in the villain's throne room as a lieutenant, looking pretty uncomfortable about the whole thing. But don't turn someone's beloved grandmother into a surprise cult leader without checking with them first. I learned this one the hard way. We are not the sole authors of the characters. The player co-owns them. Hijack that ownership without a conversation and the result isn't a shocking twist. It's the player quietly checks out and starts looking at the phone. So sometimes you just gotta ask if you're allowed to use that knife you're about to poke someone with. And another thing I can sense you all thinking right now is, my players won't sit through a villain's monologue about their backstories. And I don't think you should ever do that anyways. What you should do instead of just telling your players about the villain's history through roleplay is you can create new situations or minor NPCs that maybe resemble the events from that history. If your big bad boy was a fallen paladin who got betrayed by a greedy king, you shouldn't just put that in a book. You should put your players in a situation where they see a local guard being forced to choose between his coin and his honor. What you're trying to do is create unconscious familiarity. So when your players finally learn about the villain's origins, their brains have already been primed to recognize the emotional logic that's behind it. Another great tool to look at is the small world principle. It's basically like, most DMs think that the villain's origin has to be isolated, but the most impactful stories happen when the villain's past re-enters the present through reappearances. For instance, like Magneto, his extremism isn't just a personal choice, it's a generational warning born from the Holocaust. The world he tries to build is a constant physical rhyme of the protection he lacked as a child. And it's the same with Silco. In Arcane, the entire city of Zorn is a reflection of his original betrayal. He isn't just a drug lord, he's literally trying to heal the world by inflicting the same scars he carries. The point I'm trying to get at here is that we should treat the villain's origins as unfinished history. If the reasons your villain is the way he isn't actually something that's present and active in the world, then it doesn't really land very well. And you might be wondering, why does all all of this actually work. There is a genuine reason why a good villain origin lands the way it does. Your brain has something called the default mode network. It's the part that lights up when you're evaluating people, their motives or inner lives, basically running social simulations. We all do it. When you give a villain a real developed origin, you're feeding that network something to chew on. And the result is your players get more locked in, more synchronized with the story. A good sympathetic origin forces your players' brains to hold two contradictory things at once. Emotional resonance, I understand why he did this, I might have done the same, and ethical judgment, but what he did is still horrifying. That friction, the tug of war that they're playing now in their heads, between understanding and condemning, is where the best roleplay in your entire campaign is going to happen. Where one of your players is actually thinking through the villain's motives, backstory, all of it, and actually says you didn't have to do this and mean it. And if you're looking for a great tool to go alongside your villains, check out today's sponsor, Describe. They have basically everything you can think of. Beautiful maps with highlighted descriptions, NPCs, magical items, monsters, and I'm not just talking like 100 assets, they literally have thousands on there that you can use in pretty much any situation. And if that isn't enough, they have a tool called Opus where you can put all that information into a playlist alongside a massive library of audio tracks. I don't think I've actually not found what I was looking for since I've started using it. But if you want to support the channel and get an extended 30-day trial, then you can use my code FLAMEY. And thank you Describe for sponsoring the video. So to sum it all up, redemption is an optional choice, but origin stories are not. Your villain can die unredeemed, still clutching his cursed blade. That's all good. Or they can find some salvation at the very end, like Vader, but it doesn't really matter which path you pick. What determines whether that death or that redemption actually lands with your table is whether it's built on real historical foundation, a past that explains the present, and a wound that explains the rage. I know it sounds silly to say, but when you're writing these characters, literally put yourself in their position, like pretend to be them while you're writing, think through the thought process, and stop writing bad guys. The term's basically useless at this point. It tells you nothing. Start writing fallen heroes or resentful siblings or traumatized survivors who made one too many compromises. Next time you sit down to prep your campaign's villain, don't just look at the dice and the cool stat block you've come up with them thinking how you're going to mess your players up, because that's a very temporary feeling they're going to have. Instead, look at the wounds. Decide whether you're going to heal the wound inside your villain or whether you're going to let it burn your entire world down. Either way, at least it will mean something. So let me know in the comments how you deal with villain origin stories. What's your favorite villain that you've ever run, where their backstory came into it and your players were just swept off their feet? And if you're a player, who is your favorite villain that you could actually understand the meaning behind their actions and it actually gave you some kind of real feelings to their actions? Let me know in the comments and let's get debating. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy, adventurers.